Vietnamese culture and belief systems are rich and diverse, encompassing a blend of indigenous traditions, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and Catholicism, with a strong emphasis on ancestor veneration, family, and community. In Vietnamese culture, death is viewed as a natural part of life, a transition rather than an end, and is often seen as a chance for the deceased to ascend to become an ancestor, with rituals and ancestor worship emphasizing continuity and remembrance. In Vietnam, beliefs about the afterlife are deeply rooted in ancestor veneration and Buddhist traditions, with the understanding that death is a natural phase of the life cycle and that the deceased spirit continues to exist, influencing the living. Preparations for death involve family involvement, honoring the deceased with traditional rituals like bathing, dressing them in clean clothes, and placing them in a casket, often with a small knife for protection, and holding a wake with an altar for offerings. Family and community play a central role in death rituals, emphasizing remembrance, ancestor worship, and communal support, with the family taking the lead in planning and executing ceremonies. In Vietnamese culture, death rituals emphasize ancestor veneration, with practices like preparing the body, holding wakes, and celebrating death anniversaries, Gio, with offerings of food, incense, and prayer. The immediate family, close friends, and community members are typically present during the death and funeral process, with a focus on honoring the deceased and supporting the grieving family. When someone dies, there are specific prayers and practices, including ancestor veneration, temple visits, and burning paper money to honor the deceased and ensure their spirit's journey. In Vietnamese culture, immediate post-death procedures typically involve several important steps. First, the family will wash and dress the deceased, usually in simple traditional clothing. Then, the body is placed in a coffin, and a prayer ceremony is often held, which can take place at home or at a worship site. Next, the family will notify friends and relatives about the passing. Some families may hold a wake to allow people to come and pay their respects and pray for the soul of the deceased. Finally, the burial is usually conducted within 3 days after death, following tradition to ensure that the soul rests peacefully and does not become lost. In traditional Vietnamese practices, the body of the deceased is prepared for burial by family members washing and dressing it in white clothing, and the deceased is kept at home in a closed coffin for several days, often with incense burning and chanting. The mourning period following a death typically lasts 7 weeks, 49 days, with significant rituals and memorial services occurring on the 49th and 100th days, and the first anniversary of the death. The care of the deceased is primarily the responsibility of the family, with the eldest male often taking the lead in decision-making and acting as the family spokesperson. Traditional death ceremonies emphasize ancestral veneration and involve rituals like preparing an altar with offerings, keeping the body at home for a period, and holding a wake and funeral with specific clothing and practices. The timeline varies, but generally death is announced to family and close friends immediately. A wake, usually at home, follows, lasting several days with prayers and visitors. The funeral and burial typically occur within 3 days, sometimes sooner. A memorial service may be held later, sometimes on the anniversary of death. In Vietnamese, death customs, white clothing, white flowers, especially the white lotus, and incense are significant symbols of mourning, purification, and remembrance. The length of the mourning period, which includes restrictions on marriage and bright clothing, varies depending on the relationship to the deceased, but generally lasts 3 years for immediate family members. Mourners in Vietnamese culture typically express grief openly, often through crying and wailing. Wearing simple, dark clothing is customary. They may abstain from certain activities like celebratory events for a period of time. Respectful silence and offering condolences are expected from others. Mourning support systems center around family and community involvement, with traditions like extended wakes, feasting, and annual commemorations, emphasizing remembrance and ancestor veneration. Practices surrounding death have evolved, integrating traditional beliefs with modern influences, including a shift towards simplified mourning ceremonies and the emergence of online ancestor worship services. Contemporary interpretations of death in Vietnamese culture blend traditional beliefs with modern influences. While ancestral veneration remains important, some younger generations may adopt more secular views. However, respect for the deceased and the importance of proper funeral rites generally persist. In Vietnam, the integration of modern healthcare with cultural beliefs around death involves navigating a tension between traditional practices and the medicalization of death, with a preference for a peaceful, natural death at home and a reluctance to prolong life with invasive interventions. Views on organ donation in Vietnamese culture are evolving. While traditional beliefs about the body's integrity may present some hesitation, awareness and acceptance are gradually increasing, particularly among younger generations. However, it remains a complex issue with varying perspectives. End-of-life care and life support decisions are strongly influenced by cultural beliefs, family dynamics, and religious practices, often prioritizing a peaceful, dignified death and family involvement, while also considering the potential for spiritual disturbances. Pain management approaches for the dying often involve a combination of traditional practices, spiritual beliefs, and, increasingly, modern palliative care, with a strong emphasis on family support and maintaining a peaceful death at home. Healthcare providers should be sensitive to families' wishes regarding end-of-life care, respecting traditional practices like family presence and specific rituals. Clear and compassionate communication is crucial, and understanding the importance of ancestral veneration in decision-making is vital. A common misconception is that all Vietnamese people uniformly adhere to the same beliefs and practices regarding death. In reality, there's diversity within the culture, influenced by regional variations and individual beliefs. Another is assuming all aspects of traditional practices are rigidly followed in modern times. Show respect by offering condolences with sincere words, avoiding overly casual conversation. Observe quiet and respectful behavior during funeral ceremonies, and follow any guidance provided by the family regarding dress and actions. Remember to be mindful of the importance of family in their grieving process.